we really want this issue to get the kind of focus that it deserves, and to the degree that as our evolving work as IBW, as our work evolves, to see the degree to which we can be a part of it, with Reverend Wilson playing a central role, because he has obviously national reach, faith leaders all across the country, activists all across the country, and whatnot. So I'm going to turn to his twin. I want Parker to make the introduction.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks a million. As I look at what my responsibilities are today, I say they're pretty easy, But it's also in the perspective of what I heard, the reporting and the contents of the things that's occurring. And it seems to me the more they change, the more they remain the same, at the end of the day. And it brings about my particular perspective in the contents of Reverend Wilson. Occasionally, great men come along that have the opportunity to make transformation and changes in this world for us as people. And we are confronted with the challenges of changes. To a large degree, we don't realize the impact of certain angels and not understanding their full capacity and the ability to make transformation. But some of the times we do. And I think this is one of the times that we realize who is amongst us that has the capabilities of making transformation for us as we proceed on. Reverend Wilson comes outside of the church with a special gift of confirmation. Prior to him doing anything, he has three standards. First, is it right? Secondly, is it for his people? Third, is it controversial? If the answer is yes to all three, then he goes further with his affirmation, which is, my God, my family, my people. I've seen him lead demonstrations in regards to stopping all the traffic on 14th Street Bridge, marching it all the way back to Lord Reformatory, almost 33 miles on a Monday morning at 7 o'clock a.m., where everybody went to jail because of the protest. And there was asked while being in court, pay the $50 and you can leave. Reverend Wilson said, no, I will not pay $50. I want my day in court because I have a message that must be heard. The guns that was coming into the District of Columbia was coming from the state of Virginia that was killing a large amount of our kids. This message must be heard. And it was during the presidential election that he beat the drum on that. But not only that, coming outside the church, a Korean decided to disrespect a black woman. Reverend Wilson mobilized a march around that and for 45 days closed it down for disrespecting a black woman. This is the spirit of what we have in front of us today. The executive director of the Million Man March that brought more than 2 million black men to Washington, D.C. on the Capitol in a peaceful perspective. For peace be still, for we now have among us a presentation from Dr. Reverend Willie F. Wilson.
Repeat the right man. Repeat the right man.
I'm sure that you can know Tyrone is my twin, and my twin would speak so kindly of me, and I certainly appreciate his remarks because he in and of himself has spoken understandingly of his service in this community, in this city, and in this nation, trying to bring about change and make a difference for the masses of our people. I want to thank Brother Ron here for asking me to come tonight. I'm the president of my family reunion, which is celebrating its 84th anniversary this year, and we have a teleconference call at 8, and I might have to slip out just for a minute to be on it and just make my presence known, and then come right back if we are still convening at that point. I want to be preemptive in just a moment and say, because There's so many issues that confront us as a community and as people who have been fighting for our liberation and our freedom for all these hundreds of years. We are doing, intend to do, the 20th year recognition, should I say, because it won't be a celebration, the 20th year recognition of the Million Man March in October of this year, which is about 6 months from now. And we will be shaping, and some of you who are sitting here right now will be called upon in the next few days as we strategize in terms of an agenda, which will speak not to a celebration, but some demands that we're going to make on this United States government. I expect that there will be several million of us, because the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times in terms of what's going on, certainly foments the kind of energy that says we must do something, and we must do something now. So I just wanted to be preemptive in saying that in terms of strategy meetings that will be taking place in the next week or so, and some of you will be asked to attend those meetings so that we can strategize and map out our agenda for that coming together, which we want to make an appreciable difference. And I think it's so strategic at election time that we bring all of this together. Let me just say a few things, and I jotted down a couple of things so that I won't forget, and try to be as brief as I possibly can laying out. But my attention was arrested when, as a part of our efforts at Union Temple a couple of years ago now, we did a whole month on slavery and the continuation of that slavery in America. As we watched the video of Slavery by Another Name, my attention was pricked by that phase of the video where it showed former President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1934 meeting with AFL, the labor, to discuss, after having viewed the horrendous conditions that were prevalent in the ongoing coal mines and the railroad work, where the reinstatement of slavery had been instituted. I want to look at an historical picture just for a minute and then close with what was the federal prison industry's mandate that came out of the president's directive of 1934, which introduced and established the federal prisons and put into place Unicor and a lot of what we see going on today. Our Black Prince Malcolm X said on one occasion that when you look at history, you're looking at the origin of a thing. And if you look at the origin of a thing, it leads to the cause of a thing. And if you understand the cause of a thing, you understand the reason that institutions, issues, people, incidents are the way that they are. And so, as I have over the last couple of years began to look at history in this respect as relates to the ongoingness of slavery in this country, which has been ongoing from the time, from its incipiency even to the present time. It has never stopped. So that when we look at Michelle Alexander's signal work and the much ballyhooed and heralded work it is, where she talks about the new Jim Crow, a much more apt and appropriate perspective on it will be the old slavery, because the old slavery has never ceased to exist. That as we look at, I want to look at, just for a minute, if you give me about 10 minutes, I think I can focus this. If we look at what occurred after so-called Emancipation Proclamation, that the plantations were in shambles, the economy in the South particularly, and even the North, was collapsing because of no longer the use of all of this free labor that has made this country so great as it is today. And so the state governments were broke, plantations were desecrated, industry was disorganized, and added to this was the demoralizing defeat of the South in the Civil War and the concomitant freedom, if you will, so-called, of those who had been in slavery, which became a major issue. And as they looked at these freed slaves, as they looked at the defeat in the Civil War, as they looked at what had been done, added to this then was what we call the first Reconstruction from 1863 to 1877, when Lerone Bennett wrote an article in Ebony magazine in 1981. The title of that article was, "Will the Gains of the 1960s Be Lost?" And in talking about that, he went back and cataloged the fact that during Reconstruction we had black governor, we had black mayors, we had blacks in Congress, we had black police chiefs, we had public accommodation laws, we had voting rights laws, we had all of those things, which only added to the anger, the resentment of whites who had lost the power, particularly the poor whites. Who had lost their one-upmanship, if you will, over blacks in this country. We know that slavery wasn't, and lest I diverge, please, I don't want to go too far, but we know that after slavery, or rather in the advent of slavery, that the very first slaves were Irish. The Irish were the niggers of Europe. And that because before Columbus came to America, he went to the Caribbean islands of Montserrat. And those Irish people intermingled with indigenous African people there. And then the covenant for Anacostia, for example, in 1794, said no blacks, no Irish, no soap making in the community where Union Temple is located. You might go there now and you see a big sign in front of the site of the old Union Temple that says Town Market Square. Actually, that was the slave market where slaves in Anacostia were sold, because Cedar Hill was the home of the largest slave owner in Anacostia. A lot of us think that that house was originally owned by Frederick Douglass, but he got it in a fire sale when that slave owner could no longer control all of his holdings in Anacostia. In fact, the site where the current Union Temple is was the site of the largest plantation in Anacostia. But I diverged for a minute. Excuse me. As we went forth in this slave period, this first Reconstruction, Lerone Bennett said, will the gains of the 1960s be lost? He went back then and cataloged how we had the black governor and the black mayors and the black police chiefs and the public accommodation laws. We could go anywhere. We had voting rights laws. And then come the presidency of Rutherford B. Hayes, and with the stroke of a pen, we went back to where we were. So indeed, he was trying to say that even though those same gains had been made in the 1960s, that the very same thing occurred in the 1860s and 1870s during that first Reconstruction period, and it was quite possible because blacks were heard to say in that period of Reconstruction, slavery has forever been abolished. There's no more racism in America. And in a few days, we were being lynched again, and we were being having to walk on the other side of the street when we saw a white person coming. So then, in the midst of all this, then there was this major white backlash, if you can call it that. And what would make it possible for us then, talking about white folks, to reclaim our wealth, which we have lost? We have lost this free labor that we had, and we got to regain it. And the answer was the resubjugation of black folk, so that when so-called Emancipation Proclamation took place, in just a few days, with the laws, already having the law, the amendment to the Constitution, the 13th Amendment, saying that there would be no slavery except when a person had been convicted of a crime. So that was already there. Then on the heels of that came the black codes. And what these black codes said was then that for any reason, just as is the case now in 2015, many black men are arrested. So that for vagrancy, having just been released from slavery with no job, to be arrested for having no job, to be arrested for looking a white person in the face, to be arrested for not going to the other side of the street, to be arrested for, as African people are wont to do, congregating on a corner, just shooting the breeze, to be arrested for having some money, to be arrested for not having some money. All of these things became laws that were put on the books. So coupled with the 13th Amendment, then slavery was immediately almost reinstated, and then through trumped up charges, contrived crimes, as was just mentioned, black persons in wholesale numbers were remanded to the coal mines, which were owned by, and of course the illusion is that all of this was just happening in the South when it was all over America. The uncovering of the graves in 1999 in New York, where they uncovered several thousand graves of African people, and of course uncovered many caskets that had the Adinkra symbols carved into them, and certain tools of African people, but much more so than that, uncovered the fact that slavery was just as predominant in the North as it was in the South. And so that we know why Wall Street was established, because there was a wall to keep slaves from escaping as they were traded on Wall Street. That was the very first thing traded on Wall Street. So then, these trumped up charges that came forward made it possible to sell, resell, and lease black folks and put them back into slavery. So many of them were sent to the coal mines of Alabama and Tennessee that were owned by U.S. Steel and American Steel, the Pratt mines in Alabama, and the net effect of this was then sheriffs, state governments, court clerks, judges who were often just the owner of the plantation next to the plantation that needed some workers. They would then buy these, accuse somebody, for example, of not having any money. Bring them before the judge, who was the owner of the plantation, who needed some more slaves, and say, this man doesn't have any money, and I find him $25, which was a major amount of money at that time. And then because that man did not have the $25, okay, supposedly no money was exchanged for real, that slave owner of the plantation would say, well, I'll pay it. And then that black man would have to sign a paper saying that he had to work off that debt. And so slavery was reinstituted. And it went on so that when that period of 2 years was over, working in the mine, the coal mines, or working on a plantation, or working for somebody's business, when that time was over, then another charge was created. And that person was continually and perpetually in slavery, and that slavery went on. So that the coal mines, particularly, became gold mines.
U.S. Steel, American Steel, Carnegie Steel, Pratt coal mines of Alabama, the Tennessee coal, the railroads, all of these begin to lease, buy, sell, resell black men and women back into slavery as a result. So that the U.S. Steel, for example, had the rights to every person who was, quote, convicted of a crime on these false charges in 1908. Every living black man in America who in 1908 was accused of a crime, the rights to that person was U.S. Steel. Steel and cotton was shipped at this time to 35 different states, and tens of millions of dollars were poured into the state coffers of Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, South Carolina, North Carolina, and this peanut system was the root of it all. Now, I'm going to stick a pin there for a minute. I hope I'm not taking too long. I'll stick a pin in that for a minute, but I want to say that the conditions were so horrible in the coal mines with human excrement and in the water that the men had to drink 1,700 feet below ground level in a situation where they were in claustrophobic conditions and where disease was rampant. And what I want you to see is that the same things that are going on in prisons today, all the older prisoners had young prisoners as young as 12 years old, many of whom came from Freedom Village in Arlington Cemetery. And of course everybody here knows that that land that is now Arlington Cemetery was originally Freedman's Village, where many of the former freed slaves lived, and it was Sojourner Truth who fought that battle when many of the 12, 13, 14-year-old boys from Freedom's Village at Arlington Cemetery were captured and carried down south and made to work as slaves on these plantations and in these coal mines, and they became the gal boys of the older inmates who had been incarcerated on these false trumped-up charges. I want you to keep that in your mind, because when we get to 1982, when Ronald Reagan introduces his trumped-up charges, you can see the same situation occurring all over again. So that was then this the disease that was rampant, and all the things that what they call black damp, which was a combination of carbon dioxide and nitrogen, which these black men and women were breathing in 24/7 as they worked down these coal mines. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1934, when he saw these horrid conditions, invited the labor unions to the White House. It was then that he issued Executive Order 6917, which established the Federal Bureau of Prisons Industries, which ultimately becomes UNICOR, which ultimately becomes an organization that has 175 factories, which becomes an organization that in 2013 had a profit margin of $765 million, which became the operation that created everything, produces everything for Revlon, for Compact, for IBM, that makes 95% of the paint and the paint brushes that we paint our houses with, 45% of the office furniture, 35% of the furniture that's in our homes, Revlon, Nordstrom's, the list just goes on and on. Over 175 different companies that are now getting the cheap labor of slaves who are in the prison institutions, who make anywhere from 23 cents to $100.15 an hour, out of which they must pay court fines, court costs, child support, anything, so that there's no money left for them to do anything, even though they're not making anything to start with. So then, what we have then, as we look at, I'm trying to go fast here, the second Reconstruction, starting around 1954 with Barry Goldwater, taken up by Nixon, then reinforced by President Ronald Reagan. The whole, to hide, here's what we call we had what we call the conservative revolution. Didn't want to come out blatantly and show their racism. So they hid it behind law and order. And behind the idea of welfare queens. And the poor whites understood what they were really saying. The same anger that existed following 1865 surfaced again. That anger which was resentment because of the same public accommodation laws that had been passed during the first Reconstruction were passed again under Lyndon Baines Johnson. The same voting rights laws, the same public accommodation laws, the same voting rights laws that had been passed 100 years ago were passed again. Our dear brother Amos Wilson made us to know some years before he passed that laws don't mean a thing. Because we see that in this situation here, how the same laws that had been passed 100 years before ended up being wiped away and had to be passed again in 1968, 100 years later. So then, this white backlash against affirmative action, against all that was, quote, so-called done for these lazy Negroes who don't want to work. And now you're doing all these things for them. And so Ronald Reagan rolled that into the White House. And then with this same mentality of hiding the racism, came up with this law and order and introduced the idea of the war on drugs. And which was the same situation with the black codes. Trumped up charges that would reestablish slavery in the same sense that had been done 100 years previous. So that with this war on drugs, and of course in 1988, CIA admitted that they had whitewashed the sale and the flow of drugs into our communities by the Nicaraguan guerrillas who were being supported by the U.S. government at that time. And so then, just as the law was used, laws were created. Again, Congress passed laws, long mandatory sentences for crack cocaine usage, and the law of 3 strikes and you're right out. So that if you look at this in terms of the parallels and the similarities with the black codes, it's the same situation. Laws having been created to perpetuate this free labor so that individuals would work year in and year out for no pay. Now, the question that I pondered in my mind as I looked at this was, why did labor not fight when FDR in 1934 invited them to the White House? And they came to the White House and they were vehemently opposed because you can know how many thousands of jobs were taken from the public sector. And they went in with the argument, you're going to take thousands upon thousands of jobs from the community. And I failed to mention as well the same economic collapse that occurred after the end of the Civil War again occurred. Why? Because of globalization, because of deindustrialization, and because of technology. There was a beginning of a collapse of the economy in this country. And so then, as it was with the black codes, what is the way that we can begin to regain the wealth? And the answer was the re-establishment of slavery at the same level that it existed back in 1865, 66, when they re-established the same thing. So then the prison population, as we know, in 1950, there were less than 150,000 black men incarcerated. 1982 to the present, from 300,000 to 2 million in the jails and penal institutions of this country. So that, what was the result? As it was back then, It represents the rebuilding of little towns all over America. Pratt, Alabama is one example because the Pratt coal mines, so that Pratt, Alabama had its whole community built off of the prisons. Billions of dollars flowed as a result of cotton and because of the coal mine industry. And with that then, as we look at it today, Crescent City, California, poorest city in America, with the reestablishment of this slavery, Crescent City, California, developed a budget for that city of $765 million a year, 1,500 employees. Just the trash garbage pickup alone is a $131 million contract. 1,500 jobs. And so what happened around that? Kmart, Safeway, all kinds of department stores. A whole community. As you look at it today, go to Beaumont, North Carolina. Go to any city you want to go to, a little country town that was dead, now alive, because a prison has been put there, and the money that state is getting from, just as during 1860s, the amount of money that was given to a state when they bought a slave, or when they sold a slave, or when they resold a slave, was occurring all over again. Now, I finish with this. In 1934, when Roosevelt established, he saw the horrid conditions, he said, we just can't have this. This is worse than the slavery on the plantations. And we must do something. So he established the federal prison industries. And as I said, labor was profusely opposed to this because of the hundreds of thousands of jobs in the public sector. My conclusion is that when they finally agreed, it was because the long-term plan was the Revlons and the IBMs and the so on and the so forth of the world would be able to get their piece by getting this free labor from these slaves who were in prison, who received no remuneration. And that presidential edict that was issued in 1934 said that monies that were generated were to do three things: finance the operations, number two, provide inmate pay, number three, subsidize inmate training, because Supreme Court Justice Berger was one of the major forces. He said there must be factories with fences, and within the prisons we will have all of these factories which will prepare. There's no sense in incarcerating a person for any number of years and then they're released with no skills and no money to reestablish themselves in society. These were, and then Roosevelt added to that 5-member board was to run this operation, and anything other than that was the responsibility of the U.S. Attorney General. Now, to me, and the other thing that it said was that federal prison industries has the ability to sue and to be sued. I would think that as I continue research on this, that on several fronts, number one, where is the money that was supposed to have been set aside for the training of inmates so that they would have skills and so that they would have some monies when they got out of the institution? And what then can be, since everything, and I'm quoting, All else is in the hands of the U.S. Attorney General in terms of what happens in federal prison industries. So it would seem to me that on one count, there's room for suing federal prison industries for not doing what it's supposed to do. And secondly, petitioning, cajoling, encouraging, pushing the U.S. Attorney General to assume what responsibilities he might be able to assume based upon what the president stated in 1934 in issuing this particular statement, executive order. So that has been, so that what I'm saying is, if you clearly see what I'm saying, slavery has never ended. It continues to this day. It's not the new Jim Crow as much as it is the old statement.
All right.
And that continues to be employed to use our people and to make money off of our people, to make this country what it is. So that's
Make it plain.
Well, a couple of points before, I'm going to ask a couple of questions, but in the New York Times, I mean, to paint this picture, remember now in Ferguson, this whole issue of stopping people and finding people and what that creates. In the New York Times today, they do a case study of one person. I don't know where the state is. And it has to do with how they're taking people's driver's license away from them. So they can't get to a job. The people decide because they want to get a job, they drive anyway, they get fined again. It is this cycle of petty offenses that goes on and on and on and in. And of course in Ferguson you saw this whole thing about they was financing a whole lot of stuff through these petty stops. You know, stopping people and then people get caught up in the system and whatever as a part of it.
Are you aware that there's a paper I have and I can share it with you all about how they're using child support and how the government provide families with money because, say, the father doesn't work. But, and I'm talking about, they're into the billions and billions of dollars, but the family doesn't benefit from that money, nor when the man goes to work do they benefit from the money that the man is paying, and that money doesn't go to the children. That money goes directly into the government, and it's to the tune of some unbelievable about billions of dollars. There's a big article in this thing on race and poverty that I was talking to my class
And
about
added
this
to
week.
that, say for example, if someone is incarcerated and their wife is receiving some kind of benefits from the government, that's added to his debt.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Well, Reverend Wilson, I wanted to ask this.
It's Lebanon, Tennessee. It's Lebanon, Tennessee, the story you're talking about.
Oh, yeah, Lebanon, Tennessee, yes, and this is a whole story about that in the New York Times today. I only have one question, Reverend Wilson, before we open it up, and that is, because you and I, we were talking about this, this is such a clear picture. What's happening that we don't have the traction? Why is this issue not as prevalent and as prominent as it should be, and what steps do you think need to be taken in order to put it where it needs to be placed?
You know, and that's why I'm, you know, and we haven't had that discussion in total yet, but this is one of my thoughts. This 20th year coming together where several millions of us come together and make some demands on this government, I think. You know, all of us, you know, there's so many of us doing so many things, but we need a large number to speak and speak strong on all of the issues that are affecting us. And one of them at the top, you know, is the refusal of this country to deal with racism and white supremacy. Every time something happens, they do a little documentary on CNN for 2 days, and then it's back to business as usual. And one of the reasons they don't want to do it, is because if they really address it, every history book that's ever been written will have to be rewritten because they've lied so much. I think that's one of the reasons they don't want to do it. It will change everything. It will change, you know. But I think a great number of us with a strong message and demand. I mean, we ain't, as far as I'm concerned, we ain't coming to celebrate in October. We're coming to demand, and in great numbers, you know, men, women, children, everybody. You know, we at the time, I mean, what's going on now? We got it.
Okay, we'll take some questions now. Reverend Wilson said he has to break in about 7 minutes or so, and then he can come back, and we're only gonna hold this to about 8:15, because we keep these meetings to 2 hours, but we certainly want to give time, because we wanted to have a special meeting on this, and as we said before, Don is recording it, because we really want a way to amplify this conversation, because of the powerful voice that he is on this issue. So, did you have a question or comment? Yes.
Yeah, question and comment. Comment first is, one of the things that the government does, and that those people do, is camouflage. They give us something that takes our attention to that. And I think that, as much as I respect, I think that Barack Obama is that camouflage for the last 8 years, that, oh, we're so busy looking at that we're not looking at some of the other stuff. And it's been that way. They camouflage it so that we don't really demand. But one of the things that seems to be apparent to me is that we are in another cycle where where the white backlash is about to go.
Oh my.
And, you know, this next election is going to show it.